It's Friday, February 18th. I am Patrick Cody in the Okemo Valley TV studio today. Last week I was in front of the Woodstock Library talking to Charlie Kimbell, who was at home in Woodstock. But Charlie, today we find you still in Montpelier. So you got stuck behind today, huh? Has it been a long week?
It's been a very long week, yeah. So we're getting near to the crossover date, so everything is just, we're trying to do a lot of things in the legislature right now to make sure that you can get it done before the end of the session.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like that first stop. If you don't make it to this stop or beyond it, then it ain't going nowhere. Yeah. So as
And
an example, look behind
there
me.
you go.
So I'm on my committee room in the State House. And I still think it's the most beautiful building in which I've ever worked. But behind me is a paper representation of the bills that have been introduced to the committee here. So you can see all of the bills on this side. Those are the ones that have been referred to us and that we're still contemplating. And the thinner line are the bills that we've actually moved out of committee. So they're still in the bigger group. There's about 4 or 5 that we're going to try to move before March 8th or March 11th, I think, is crossover date. But the other ones we've already moved on. So it's kind of a good visual representation of the things that we've been asked to look at and the things that we actually have time to look at.
Mm-hmm. And just running down the list there, the smaller list that you've moved out of your committee, what are those?
Okay, so some of them are not very exciting. Today we just passed out of the House, actually. We voted on it the first time. H515, which is a housekeeping bill on banking and regulation. It's a 98-page bill, deals with captive insurance companies, travel insurance, various things. Another bill that we passed on workers' compensation is to really set the administrative rate on workers' compensation policies, because the state administers workers' comp instead of it going out to OSHA. So VOSHA does it, Vermont Occupational Safe and Health Administration. So anyway, that's one of the fees that it gets charged into workers' compensation premiums to pay for the services of the department. Then there's an insurance banking Act 25 that was from last session. So these are representing 2 years worth of bills that we've moved out. So it's quite a lot, and there's some bills that we do every year, some around insurance and banking, some around unemployment insurance, and it's amazing how every year there are things that you just have to update the existing statutes.
So that column on is showing bills that have moved out, and that's 2 years worth of bills.
Yes.
And so the larger list, some of those I'm assuming are not going to make it out. And is that,
Yeah.
and that's a lot. That's a large list. I mean, will some of those die on the vine, or?
Some of them some of them have been incorporated into other bills that have moved out. But the actual bill that was introduced isn't moving anywhere. And some of them are still, I think there's 4 bills up there that we're going to be moving out, and working furiously to do that, but before March 11th. But yeah, the legislature, the House introduces about 1,000 bills every 2 years. And of those 1,000, about 120 get passed. So a little over 10%, 12%, if you look at it that way, of the bills that get introduced get passed. And that's a small percentage, but a lot of them are also duplicates. So there could be one, and it's up to the representatives to introduce a bill. Some may have almost the same language or address the same type of thing. So you take up one of those 2 bills, not both of them. So there's a lot of duplication.
As we've been doing throughout this session, you've been coming on Fridays and giving some highlights, lowlights, big news, things that really that you worked on from the past week that you want to touch on. So I want to give you that opportunity. What do you got for us this week? What was some of the bigger items?
The word of the week seems to be navigator, where we have people, different departments that are trying to establish regional navigators. And one is with the Department of Labor, and that's trying to establish navigators to help both employers and employees match one another, working with also the educational institutions in those communities, some of the training providers, that kind of stuff. So Department of Labor has one idea. The Agency of Commerce and Community has a different idea about how that would look. We've also talked about navigators and child care services. And so that seems to be the word of the week is navigators. And we looked at a lot of different plans and a lot of different ideas as to how to better align the interests of both employees and employers, and then through those community navigators, and much different concepts coming from the Department of Labor and the Agency of Community Development and Commerce and Community Development. They kind of complement one another, but it's really hard to sort out as to what is the we're working through that. There's a lot of overlap, and taking a lot of testimony, giving a lot of thought to it. So it's really fascinating. So that's one big one. What we talked today about Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economy Collaborative, VOREC. And last year we allocated $5 million to them, and they've had over $20 million in requests. No, wait a minute. That's not true. It's actually bigger than that. So VOREC, Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, has had $21.5 million of requests, for $5 million in funding. So there's a lot of projects. I mean, they do a lot around different recreational aspects. So the town of Randolph got a grant, Newport. I think some of our local communities have received grants, and it could be for improving a trailhead, it could be for erecting an outdoor trail, or maybe even marketing a different, like the Slate mountain bike trails down in Poultney, and just trying to improve that end of the business. But it's not just trails and it's not just parking lots. It does a lot of other stuff like that too. But it's mostly infrastructure and that kind of thing.
That's something that came through your committee?
Yep, that's coming through our committee. It started out probably 3 years ago as a $100,000 program, and then I think Randolph was one of the primary recipients of that money. And then the next year it was $200,000, and then with the pandemic money that we had coming in, it was $5 million last year, and that was made possible through general funds, not the pandemic funds, but the pandemic funds covered other things that the general funds would have ordinarily covered. And they asked this year is for another $5 million. So they do a lot of great programs. One of the interesting things, though, is the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation maintains all the state parks throughout the state. And they usually have about 400 seasonal workers. So it's a lot to hire every year. So far this year, they've had just 38 applications, and which at this time they have usually about 200 applications. So there's these great jobs. They provide a great experience. Most of them provide accommodations. So they provide housing, and it's for, 12 weeks or more. But I don't know if they're going to be able to fill them. I mean, typically at this time of year, they have 200 applications, and now they only have 38. So they're scratching their heads trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, workforce shortage is still the thing.
Yeah, it's not something that gets solved overnight, evidently.
Evidently not, no. Yeah. And we're still trying to look for long-term solutions and also trying to meet the short-term needs too.
Just in terms of housekeeping and logistics, are most of the House members now back in person and in committee, or are you still sort of doing this hybrid model?
We're still doing the hybrid, but I'd say of our 11 committee members, we have 8 of them in the committee room. And I'd say that's probably about the same for the rest of the House. So there are very few people that are still home. And they're supposed to have a reason for staying at home related to COVID, because either they are compromised or they need to be taking care of somebody else there. And that's generally the case. There might be a couple of exceptions to that, but today, for instance, we had one of our committee members couldn't come because her childcare just closed because of the weather. So she had to stay there. But so that's unusual. And years past, that person just wouldn't have been able to participate. But now, because we've adopted the technology, that person can participate. So that's a good thing. But we meet people in the hallways. It's happening now. We have more lobbyists returning to the halls of, I should say, advocates, but lobbyists returning to the halls of the legislature, and we see them and talk to them about bills that we're working on, and they provide a great source of information for us, and that they're good to have around. But so it's getting back to normal-ish. The Senate still isn't here. I think they're coming back when we resume after town meeting break on March 8th.
Mhm. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, they're still all over Zoom, and I got to ask because with the loosening of restrictions statewide, I know in the town we're in a town-owned building here, and the town of Ludlow has a mask ordinance in place, but they're letting it sunset come Monday on the 21st, and I think a lot of towns around the state that have mask ordinances are doing something similar. You're now back at the State House, and it sounds like there's an increasing number of people there. Have there been, what kind of safety protocols are in place, and how is everyone feeling just generally about the COVID situation?
Well, there's three things. One is everybody's just tired of it, and you can see it on people's faces, and they don't want to wear masks anymore. But we still have protocols in place. That's the second thing. We're still abiding by those. We wear masks, face masks, whenever we're in the building. I'm not doing it right now because I'm the only one in the building. And we hand washing, and our rooms are limited in terms of capacity. The room where I'm in has an occupancy limit right now of 13 people. We didn't have it before on some controversial bills. We'd have 25 people in this room, and it's not very big, but so it got really tight in the past, and so that's the other restriction. And the third is that we're looking towards what's our next step, and our rules committee meets every week to talk about what the next step is in terms of now can we have greater occupancy or greater room occupancy levels? Can we stop wearing masks? So that's a discussion that happens every week, several times. So we're going to be adjusting again as to what we do and trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Now we come to a new segment, viewer questions. So we've reached out to your constituents throughout the community and asked them to provide questions for you. We've had a couple that come in this week. So and I'd like to. One of them is a serious question, and one is maybe a little, I would say, less so. But let's take the serious question first. And this comes from Melissa Lyons, a resident of Plymouth. So she wrote this last week after watching whatever segment we were running last week. But she said this past week, which would have been, I guess, a week ago, I believe the governor decided to use $50 million of the monies given to Vermont out of the COVID fund to install 107 cell towers within Vermont. Could it be possible that some of the money could be used to upgrade or activate cell towers that are already standing in Vermont? So she's saying, as a resident of Plymouth, we have a cell tower without a carrier to provide services. The tower was built after Tropical Storm Irene and has stood unused ever since. Most homeowners in Plymouth do not have cell phone services unless their phones are on their Wi-Fi networks. Plymouth is a small town, however, it does have Route 100 and Route 100A that has very little phone coverage. The need for cell phone coverage is more important for emergency services here, with the state parks and outdoor recreation Plymouth has. Being in a remote area without cell service could literally be a life or death situation if you need to call 911. So I believe this was the main reason to install a cell tower on our property in the first place. What do you have to say about that?
I have seen that cell tower when I was campaigning, and said, wow, who owns that? And that was a question at the time, and is it being used? But no, you're right. The governor has proposed to Michelle's right. Michelle, right? Melissa Lyons. Yes, the governor's proposed $50 million to erect, I think, 100 cell towers throughout the state to improve telecommunications for mobile phones in very hard to reach places. So they've done a kind of survey as to where those cell towers should go, but haven't ruled anything yet. At this point, it's very early on. So they're looking for the easiest path to really provide the most communication. So if a cell tower exists, wonderful. All right, so if the tower's already there but it's not live, the key for this, as I think she knows, is there a provider that's willing to commit to putting their service on the tower? And that's part of the bill that has been introduced, is making sure there is a commitment of one of the major carriers to provide that service, and the other carriers then, almost by extension through roaming or whatever, would also be on that tower. So yes, I think the short answer is yes, and I will find out more definitively from the folks in the Department of Public Service who are managing that. There's a couple of folks that are doing that. In terms of the telecommunications. So it's a really good question. I've spoken to another person in the Woodstock area that's looking at putting up some cell towers in cooperation with a few other investors to really put those up and get people to get some of the carriers on there. One of the biggest benefits is not only just the personal use, and if you can call 911 or and do some of that, but is also because of the first responders. I mean, first responders have done a great job of erecting towers and repeaters and that kind of communication, but oftentimes they may be at home where they don't get any cell service. One of the benefits of creating more towers is to be able to also contact those first responders in the event there is an emergency. And so that's also a public safety issue. So that is what the person in Woodstock that I met with is looking at doing, and I think what the governor's talking about. A much different issue, but related, is there's a proposal from the administration to change who is providing dispatch services. Right now, the state police are providing them at no charge for a variety of communities where there is not 24/7 dispatch services. So they're trying to push that off from the state police onto the communities to form regional organizations to pick up that service and pick up that obligation. And so there's some one-time money to be provided to either update the equipment or that kind of stuff, but it's not ongoing money. Going to learn more next week, meeting with the commissioner of the Department of Public Service Safety to find out what the real proposal is and what it means for towns like Plymouth and Reading and Woodstock, and as to what's currently being done, what's the additional cost, if any, for our network. I mean, we have a pretty good dispatch service in Woodstock, which is 24/7, but other towns, are they covered by state police right now? So we have to find that out. So that's a totally different subject, but it's very, very important to know exactly what it is.
Well, it certainly sounds like you have your finger on the pulse of that issue.
Yeah, that's a little bit. So anyway, yeah, I read the governor's proposal for $50 million for that, and I thought, this is excellent. We need better coverage throughout the state. And if we have the money, let's use it to do it. The question then becomes, how do you set it up? What happened before, not to digress too far, not to take too much time, but the state owned a number of small repeaters at one point in time, and erected these repeaters along roads mounted on telephone poles. And then they had a contract with, I believe, Green Mountain Power at the time. It might have been CVPS, I'm not sure, to provide power to them. And then those in areas where there was no cell phone coverage at all would, for that very small area, provide cell phone coverage. The program didn't work. The program didn't work because the providers decided they didn't want to be on there. I mean, so there was Verizon and AT&T are like, no, we don't want to do it. So it died. There wasn't enough traffic on there. The expenses, and the person that owned the company that was providing the services also passed away. And the people that came up after the owner didn't really run the company to expand or maintain that service. So anyway, that's It's too much information, but so we just want to make sure that in the new construct that some of those big service providers are committed to maintaining that service on the pole. Otherwise, nobody's going to use it.
So the other one doesn't come from one of your constituents per se, so you don't have to spend as much time on it. It is a current Ludlow resident who says he's moving to Florida. But whereas you are running for statewide office for lieutenant governor, I'm sure you're getting around a little bit, and you are running as a Democrat. And I just, I'm wondering if you are seeing in Vermont what has played out over the last several years on the national scene with really stark sort of divisiveness between political parties. And, it's like I didn't see it play out as much until recently. I would say I've seen it more where there's sort of national politics have really trickled down to sort of the local level, that divisiveness, the partisan divisiveness. And so this question is meant to be offensive, by the way, is what he wrote.
Okay, perfect.
All right, great. So prepare. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. So Charlie, could you explain why Democrat politicians are so gutless, ineffective, self-serving? And then actually, I'm not going to read the rest. It uses an offensive term, but he says he's asking for a lot of friends. And he goes on to say it's because of the policies of the Democrats / socialists / communists on the national, regional, and local levels are beyond offensive to myself, my family, and most of my friends. So number one, have you, I guess, as an aside, have you always affiliated with the Democratic Party? And have you noticed, no matter which side you're on, there being this sort of partisan biased?
I'll start by saying that yes, we've seen that divisiveness in politics at a very local level. I mean, you can go to school board meetings where police have been called in because the people that are talking to the school board become, I don't want to say unruly, but not respectful of the process, or just not enabling the board to get the work done. Many people come to and it's not any one particular party, it's people feel very passionately about the issues. And some of the strain of the pandemic has played out this way. So we've got people coming to school board meetings that are yelling and shouting. We have it happening at city council meetings as well, up in the northern part of the state, where they're just kind of yelling at each other and not trying to listen at all. And so the divisiveness definitely has played out on a local level. Over in Springfield, the school board has been wrestling with people that are accusing the school board of teaching critical race theory. That's not being done, from what I understand, but is being interpreted as being this very divisive policy. So yeah, it is divisive. So in terms of the Democrats, I mean, it's a broad party. So I can understand why someone may say, I'm going to look at the most extreme person in the party, or extreme views, and say, Democrats are worthless because I don't agree with anything they say. And so there are extremities on both ends of the parties. And I don't think that's very productive to just call an entire party that way, and that we all have certain members. I myself am a fairly moderate Democrat, and I haven't always been a Democrat. To answer your question, I was a Republican until 2016, and I changed parties, and it was mostly because of some of the things that I saw going on at the national level for the Republican Party. And I carefully, in terms of what your writer asks, is that looked at, well, is there enough room for me within the Democratic Party? Here I am, fiscally conservative, and more socially liberal than people that I'd affiliated with in the Republican Party. Is there enough room for me in the Democratic Party? And I find myself on the fringe sometimes of the Democratic Party, on the more conservative side, and sometimes voting for things that are an issue of the caucus, because it becomes a team sport. But you always have to weigh, whenever you're voting on anything, you weigh your conscience, the issues of your constituents, and then the interests of your caucus. So it's, and then you have to decide which one. And sometimes it's all three, and sometimes they don't agree. So I've had those issues several times. An example is looking at increasing the minimum wage. For me, I voted against the increase in the minimum wage when it came around the House. And that was because I looked at what New Hampshire was doing at $7.25 an hour is their minimum wage, but their actual effective wages paid was more than what Vermont's average wage was, even though we had a much higher minimum wage. Like, okay, that's interesting. And if you talk to an economist, they'll say minimum wages don't work. So that's my more fiscal conservative side approaching. But then the governor vetoed the bill that would have increased the minimum wage, and I was one of, I think, 3 holdouts in the Democratic Party. And at that point, it's about process, and it's about team sports at that point. So I still didn't feel like minimum wage was necessary to increase it in order to increase people's actual take-home pay, but I voted to override the governor's veto. So it's one of those things about, yes, my conscience and what I believe to be true, I voted. And then when it came back to the process question, I voted with my party. So it's sometimes difficult to be in that position of trying to determine how you're going to vote. And I think the person that stops thinking about that and just goes with what the party may recommend is, I think, someone who just stops thinking. And you don't want that. You want someone who's going to evaluate things on the value of their personal convictions, and then also what's good for their constituents. I mean, we're elected to represent our constituents, and that's what we're there for. Anyway, that long answer to a...
Well, thanks for an honest answer. And on the fun side, hopefully this is a nonpartisan issue. Last week you said you were doing a diner tour of Vermont, yes, and you're taking a straw poll, and so we were helping you with that and asking folks what about their favorite diners in Vermont. And just today we got a response of the not too far from where I'm sitting, the Country Girl Diner in Chester.
Been there.
And the Springfield Royal Diner.
I haven't been to the Springfield Royal Diner. That's the one that's the chrome one on the outside, right? Yeah, I haven't been to that one yet. Got to check that out.
So there you go.
So I got a couple of recommendations too. I did eat at the one in Barnard. No, in Bethel.
Oh, Bethel. Oh, okay.
Bethel, yep. Yeah. And went to the Wayside in Barry Montpelier Road last week, and that's been there for 103 years. Gotta like that. And got a couple of recommendations for the Miss Bellows Falls Diner.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm thinking of Miss Lindenville. I've been to Miss Lindenville. I didn't know Miss Bella Falls. Yeah.
Miss Lindenville is a good diner. Absolutely. P&H Truck Stop, I think, is one of my favorites, though.
Yeah.
Up on Route 302, right off of
Wells River.
Yeah, you can call it a diner. I mean, it's pretty big. I mean, it's not. And the Windsor Diner, I got to check out the Windsor Diner.
Yeah.
I haven't been there in years. The Heartland Diner is always great food.
Being in Woodstock back in the, this is going back years ago, but did you ever go out to Bridgewater on Route 4 and go to Blanche and Bill's Pancake House?
You know, I never went there. Now it's what, is it Brewski's now?
Drewski's, I think it's called. And it's right on the river, and I think it got wrecked back in, during Irene. But that Blanche and Bill's Pancake House, that was great. And I don't know if that qualifies. I don't know what qualifies a diner. I mean, do you have to have the counter?
Yeah, you got to have the stools that rotate by the counter, you know.
Oh, right. It's not only does it have to be a stool, it's got to be a rotating stool.
It's got to rotate. Yeah, the Wasp Diner in Woodstock was a classic. I think maximum of 12 seats right there at the counter. And the Audsleys ran it for a long time. Great diner. Love that food. And just the Brownsville Butcher and Pantry doesn't qualify as a diner, but tremendous foods. I went there last weekend and went up, skied on Mount Scottney, and it was wonderful skiing there again. And then went to the Brownsville Butcher and Pantry. But they've really made that an attraction. It's pulling people from 30, 40 miles away.
I don't know if you caught this, but there was an article. David Goodman wrote an article that got published in the New York Times about a week or two ago about Ascutney and the store, the butcher and pantry, and the sort of the renaissance that the town and the village of Brownsville has seen because of the successes there. So.
Yeah, I went to high school in Woodstock, but lived in Brownsville and used to walk, freshman year of high school, used to walk in my ski boots from my house on Seams Road up across the field where now there is a hotel to the bottom of the ski lifts to go skiing at night. And when there was night skiing at Ascutney. So I remember it back then in the old lodge, and that was an era that I remember fondly. But the new era has such energy, and it's so approachable. It's amazing what a small group of people that are committed to a dream can do. Boy, it's great to see.
That's a good soundbite. I'm sure they'll want to use that. Yeah. All right. Well, any parting thoughts here before we sign off?
No, it's it's getting dark up here in Montpelier. I'm sure it's dark down there.
Well, it's dark in the studio. I mean, the walls. Yeah, I can't see outside. Yeah.
No, I thank you for the time. Oh yeah, one last parting thought. Today, the House voted on a bill that establishes a new city. So Essex Village, Essex Junction Village. They've been fighting with the town for a long time as to how to really get along, and there've been several decades and maybe even generations of people who lived in the town and the village trying to figure out what to do. So Essex Village had taken a vote to form its own city. So unlike Woodstock Village lies in Woodstock Town, and so it's subject to all the rules of the town too. When you become a city like that, you become your own entity. You're no longer part of the town. So Essex Village is now going to be part of Essex City. That's it. Yep. So it's kind of fascinating. The great line that the representative from Essex said today is, "It takes a village to raise a city." I thought that was excellent.
Wow. So now we're up to 252 in Vermont. Is that right? Because I know there was 251 cities and towns.
I don't think so, because it's transferring the village to the town, village to a city. So it's not increasing the number at all. Zero-sum game.
Yeah. All right. Gotcha.
Yep. Pretty, but pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty interesting to see that. Yeah.
Well, okay. I guess we'll see you next week, and I want to thank you for your time. And we'll start. We'll put some feelers out there to get some more questions for you next week.
All right. Great. Terrific. Thanks.